There is a moment, quieter than breath, faster than thought, where reality hasn't yet decided what it will become. Most never notice it, but you did. And now you're here, listening, resting, maybe from a soft bed or a room dim with evening light. Wherever you are, let it hold you gently. Because what you're about to discover isn't loud. It's not about chasing goals or fixing your life. It's about noticing the whisper beneath it all, the moment before the moment, the flicker before choice. In this story, you'll slip into that sacred pause, where the body speaks first and the field listens instantly. We'll explore how your energy quietly builds your future long before your mind catches up. So take a breath. Subscribe so we can share this space again, and let this gentle awareness settle in. Because you're not behind. You're already standing at the edge of everything, and the next shift begins right here. There is a silence most people never hear, not because it's hidden, but because it arrives just before anything else begins. Before the mind reaches for logic, before emotion forms into language, before the body commits to motion, there is a pulse, a faint tremor of becoming. You have felt it before. In that breath you took without knowing why, in that pause before saying yes or no, in the flicker behind your eyes, when the world tilts for half a second, and something inside, you knows, something just shifted. It is not thought, it is not instinct, it is something older. And it's from this delicate pre-moment that your entire life begins, over and over again. Not once at birth, but every day. In microseconds of choice that most never see dot, we tend to believe we're living from decision to decision, as if life is a staircase built by logic. But that's an illusion crafted by the slow machinery of the conscious mind. The truth is more fluid, more electric. Neuroscience has begun to map it, but mystics knew it long before electrodes confirmed it. Your life is shaped not by conscious willpower, but by the hidden readiness of your internal field, by how you vibrate before you speak, how you lean forward before you move, how you tense or soften before a word is even formed. You are not a thinker who sometimes feels. You are a signal that thinks. And everything you call your reality is simply responding to that signal, again and again. Take a moment to observe that idea, softly. Let it ripple through your chest like a distant sound carried by wind. If your body, your mood, your posture are all tiny transmitters, then the world you're standing in is already shaped by the frequency they're broadcasting. The key isn't to override this, but to begin noticing it. Noticing that moment just before the mind arrives. That quiet flicker where the future is still soft clay. This is the edge of consciousness, and you're already standing there. Strange, isn't it? That you could shape the unfolding of time by something as subtle as a sigh. And yet, that's what the quantum field reflects. In the deep layers of reality, the observer effect tells us that what's watched shifts because it's watched. But what if the first observer isn't your mind, but the vibration of your presence itself? Your resting readiness, your posture of belief, the texture of your expectation. These aren't concepts, they're active ingredients in the chemistry of experience. They ripple outward like ink and water, staining the probabilities around you with flavor, mood, and tone. And this happens long before a single decision is consciously made. You felt it, haven't you? That moment when something felt off, even though you had no reason to think so. That job interview, that message, that handshake. Everything looked right, but your body spoke differently. Maybe your breath shortened. Maybe your shoulder locked. Maybe your chest gave that faint flutter of warning. We call it intuition, but it's actually a precise vibrational preview. Your nervous system tuning into the field before the mind interprets it. You weren't being irrational. You were receiving. That's the frequency beneath your life. Not mystical in the sense of fantasy, but mystical in the sense of deeply attuned physics. You are an instrument, and the universe is always listening. Now consider what that means. If your subconscious signals are already shaping the field, before you act, then true transformation isn't about doing more. It's about sensing earlier. Most people try to change their lives by pushing harder at the surface. They set goals. They speak affirmations. They visualize outcomes. But if the base signal, the energetic hum beneath it all, is still shaped by fear or doubt or self-abandonment, then the quantum field listens to that first. That's why effort alone often fails. It's like yelling over a song that's already playing without realizing you are the one who pressed play in the first place. Let's go deeper. Neuroscientists like Benjamin Libet found something strange. The brain's readiness potential, the signal that prepares for movement, fires before a person reports choosing to move. That means your body decides before your mind does. Not in opposition to you, but as you. You are not a singular point of awareness. You are a layered orchestra of frequency, biology, memory, and presence. And in the quietest layers, the ones most people ignore, your true power rests. In the pause, in the posture, in the breath before. But why does this matter? Because your suffering, the confusion, the repeating patterns, the stuckness, often stems not from what you consciously want, but from what your field silently repeats. You may say you desire connection, but if your nervous system flinches every time someone gets close, the field picks that up. You may speak abundance, but if your jaw tightens at the thought of receiving, the quantum collapses that mixed signal into contradiction. It's not punishing you. It's responding to the most coherent broadcast. And coherence doesn't come from thought. It comes from alignment. Now pause. Let your breath deepen, even slightly. Can you feel the subtle electricity behind your ribs? That low hum beneath your thoughts? That's where reality begins. And if you stay with it, even for a moment, longer than usual, you begin to notice strange things. People call you at the exact time you think of them. A message arrives right as you're about to give up. A solution comes after you stop forcing it. These aren't coincidences. They are the natural response of a field that is reading you constantly. Not the you project, but the one you embody. That's why your attention matters more than your effort. What you hold in your awareness, not just what you think, but what you feel deeply enough to become, begins to arrange the outer world. But this happens in whispers, not commands. The quantum doesn't speak English. It speaks coherence. So when you feel the pull to slow down, to breathe, to listen inwardly before acting, that's not avoidance. That's alignment in process. That's the whisper saying, wait, the moment before this moment is where the door opens. Have you ever made a decision without knowing why, and only later did it reveal itself as the exact right move? That's because the deeper you already knew, not in words, but in resonance, you are already walking toward the timeline that matched your frequency. And when you trust that inner shift, not impulsively, but consciously, you begin to feel time itself respond. Events unfold smoother. Obstacles soften. The noise fades. You didn't control it. You harmonized with it. That's the beginning of real power. The power to notice earlier. To tune your awareness not to the noise of outcomes, but to the softness of initiation. That's what most people miss. They're waiting for life to scream, but life actually whispers. And that whisper happens in the space before you speak, before you choose, before you move. When you live from that space, something changes. You begin to notice the weave behind the visible, and your presence begins to edit the pattern knot. So the question becomes, how do you live from that space more often? How do you stop missing it? The answer isn't dramatic. It's soft. It starts with presence, with attention, with noticing the felt sense of the moment before you respond. The way your chest lifts or your eyes widen, or your breath shortens. These aren't just reactions. They are cues. Cues from the deeper you, shaping your next moment before your mind even arrives. When you slow down enough to hear them, you begin rewriting your life from the inside out, not by strategy, but by frequency dot. And when you learn to live in that space, the moment before the moment, you realize something stunning. You are never behind. You are always just one breath away. There's something most people never pause long enough to realize. Your life is not reacting to what you want. It is responding to what you are. Not just what you believe intellectually, but what you carry inside your chest, inside your gut, in the quiet geometry of your nervous system. The world isn't waiting for your perfect affirmation. It's listening to your frequency, your readiness, your inner coherence. Not the words you speak out loud, but the signal you broadcast silently. And the strange truth is, that signal forms before your thoughts do. Let's go deeper into this signal. Imagine standing at a crossroads. Two roads before you, neither. Clearly labeled, but something in your stomach curls slightly when you glance at the one on the left. You feel that tightness in your solar plexus. No logic, no explanation, just sensation. Most people brush past it, forcing logic to lead. But that tightness is not random. It's a signal, a warning, a tremor from your internal field scanning, the quantum landscape, and registering something before your conscious mind can name it. Your body already knows. And when you learn to listen to that early knowing, life begins to guide you more precisely than any plan ever could. Because the body isn't just a vessel, it's a translator, a real-time interpreter of energy, emotion, and probability. Your nervous system, shaped by every experience you've ever had, becomes a forecasting system, not in a mystical sense, but in a predictive neurological one. This is called predictive coding. Your brain is constantly forecasting the next moment, not based on external facts, but on internal patterns. It decides what you're likely to experience, and then filters reality to fit that expectation. It's not just perception. It's construction. Now feel the gravity of that. If your internal system expects rejection, the world will bend to mirror that. If your nervous system expects safety, ease, connection, and even unfamiliar spaces, begin to feel like home. And this has nothing to do with thinking positively. This has everything to do with coherence between your inner signal and your outer experience. The field, that quantum fabric of possibility, doesn't filter between your mind's wishes and your body's beliefs. It responds to the strongest, clearest signal. And that signal is usually formed just below awareness dot. So if you're walking through life wondering why you keep looping the same pain, the same patterns, the same stuckness, it's not because you're broken. It's because your deeper signal hasn't changed, even if your words have. You're saying, I want love, but your signal is still echoing the protective shell you learned as a child. You're declaring, I want success, but your inner forecast still predicts danger when seen. This isn't sabotage. This is the brilliance of your system, keeping you safe based on the data it has. And that data is emotional, sensory, ancient dot. But what happens when you update that signal? When you stop trying to force a different outcome and start shifting the readiness that shapes it, that's when reality begins to rearrange itself. Quietly, subtly, quantumly. The path to change is not paved with intensity. It's paved with sensitivity. The more sensitive you become to your own early cues, the more precisely you can shift the direction of your life. It's like adjusting a rudder just a few degrees, but doing it miles before the destination. You don't need to overhaul your entire personality. You just need to listen one layer deeper and act from there. Here's how it often begins. You're about to reply to a message. It's not a big moment. It's just a text. But you pause, And in that pause, you feel something. Maybe your shoulders tense slightly. Maybe your breath shortens. That's not nothing. That's the body warning you. If you answer now, you're not answering from your center. It's not moral or dramatic. It's mechanical, energetic. That's the moment, the exact moment where most people override. They type the message anyway. They say yes when they mean no. They smile when something inside is aching. And in doing so, they reinforce the incoherence. They tell the field, here's my signal, I betray myself. But when you pause and choose differently, when you wait, breathe, shift into a state of internal alignment before acting, you begin to broadcast something new, not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently enough that the field begins to mirror it. Interactions soften, resistance fades. The coincidences multiply. You've changed your microsignal, and now the macro pattern is catching up. This is the quiet revolution. Not changing what you do, but changing the frequency from which you do it. It's subtle work, and it requires reverence. Because the body doesn't speak in language. It speaks in warmth, cold, tightness, ease, pull, push. You're not decoding poetry. You're learning to read temperature, texture, tone. And over time, this fluency becomes a kind of superpower. You enter a room and feel before you speak. You meet someone and trust the sensation before the performance. You make choices not based on fear, but based on signal clarity. This is energetic intelligence, and it's always been inside you. So, why don't we use it more? Because most people are too loud inside. Their internal space is cluttered with rehearsals, worries, overthinking. And in that noise, they miss the cue. The real invitation, the one from the deeper field, is almost always quiet. It arrives like the edge of a thought, like the pressure of breath before an inhale, like the softness in your throat before you speak. And that's where creation begins, in the place before you know what you're about to say. When you live there, in that pre-thought sensitivity, you stop chasing alignment and begin becoming it. You no longer need to affirm worthiness. You begin to feel it, not as a performance, but as a pulse. You don't push away doubt. You hold it gently and listen, because even doubt carries a signal, a map. And when you treat every internal sensation as information, not interruption, you enter a different kind of relationship with life. One where nothing is wasted. One where every moment, even confusion, is a breadcrumb leading you inward. And something extraordinary happens. You stop trying to manifest outcomes. You start manifesting states. Instead of wanting a thing to arrive, you become the version of you who would already have it. And the outer world, which has always been listening, adjusts accordingly, not because you manipulated it, but because you finally matched it. This is quantum alignment, not control, not wishful thinking, but state-based resonance. It's why someone can say all the right things and still get no traction, because their frequency says, I don't believe this. And it's why someone else, barely speaking at all, can radiate change, because their field is coherent. It's not about volume. It's about consistency, precision, softness. You've known this all along. You've seen it in children, in artists, in those who move from presence instead of pressure. There's something magnetic about them, something deeply honest. And that honesty doesn't come from knowing more. It comes from overriding less. So take this moment right now as an experiment. Let your jaw soften. Let your belly unclench. Feel the shape of your own presence. Not to fix it, just to witness it. Because that witnessing, that quiet seeing, begins to shift everything. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's true. And the field always responds to what's true. This is where you start, not by doing, but by noticing. not by efforting, but by receiving dot, and what you receive is not an instruction dot. It's an invitation dot to live one layer deeper than most ever dare. To go dot to speak only when the signal feels clean, dot to move only when the body says yes, dot to trust that the smallest shift in posture, in attention, in breath, can change the shape of the entire day. Because it can, and it already has dot. There comes a moment, not loud, not grand, when you stop trying to send the perfect message into the universe and instead become the message itself. Not because you've achieved anything, but because you've begun listening at the frequency where truth lives. It's a place beneath identity, beneath performance, beneath even language. A subtle hum that's always been there, waiting for you to notice. And the moment you do, everything begins to reorient. You are not here to manufacture alignment. You are here to remember it, and that remembering is quieter than you think. It doesn't come from grand declarations or perfect plans. It comes from the moment you breathe a little deeper and feel the difference. It comes when you notice how your chest tightens before a decision and choose not to override that signal again. It comes when you stop speaking from the version of you who's performing worthiness and begin speaking from the one who's already enough without needing to explain. This is not about rewriting your story. It's about no longer forgetting who the author is, because what you're authoring isn't a list of goals. It's a field of resonance, and that field isn't waiting for the future. It's shaping the present, the more deeply you attune to that field, the more naturally you begin to move from alignment instead of effort. You no longer try to make things happen. You sense when they're already happening, and you move with them. Life becomes less of a battle and more of a conversation. You begin to hear the response before you ask the question. You begin to feel which timeline has already opened before your mind has language for it. That's not mysticism. That's coherence. And coherence doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. It asks, simply, are you broadcasting the same signal you believe you are? Most people live in contradiction. They say yes with their words, but no with their nervous system. They chase love while fearing visibility. They crave abundance, but carry guilt for wanting more. And these contradictions create static in the field, not because they are bad, but because they are split signals. And the field doesn't punish you for them. It just reflects the strongest tone, the clearest signal, the deeper truth. So if things feel stuck, if your life is circling a theme that you can't break, pause. Don't push harder. Listen deeper. Because the solution isn't in doing more. It's in discovering what your signal has been saying without your permission, and gently rewriting it, not with force, but with tenderness. That rewrite doesn't begin with declarations. It begins with noticing the way your hands tremble when you're about to speak a truth you've been swallowing, the way your breath catches when you consider asking for more. The shame that rises when you imagine receding with ease. These aren't flaws. They are invitations, doorways, early signals from a version of you that's already more whole than the one you've been trying to become. And the moment you listen to them, you step into a different geometry of reality, one shaped not by performance, but by permission. Permission to rest. To want. To receive. To be. And in that being, your signal clarifies. It stops arguing with itself. It becomes clean, crisp. Stillness is not absence. It's precision. Stillness is where reality reshapes itself around your presence. Not because you've shouted your desire into the void, but because you've become a frequency too consistent to ignore. That's what the field responds to. Not trauma, not effort, not desperation masked as determination, but still coherent presence. The kind that doesn't beg, it simply is. The kind that doesn't try to force outcomes, it invites them. The kind that trusts its own timing, because it knows that nothing aligned can be missed. It might pass you once to teach you how to feel, but when your signal is true, it will return, always. And when it does, when reality reshapes itself around the frequency you've embodied, it won't feel like a reward. It will feel like a remembering. You won't feel triumphant. You'll feel home. That's how you'll know you're in alignment. Not because everything is suddenly perfect, but because the war inside your chest has gone quiet. You'll walk into rooms and feel your own presence ripple before your voice. You'll rest not because you've earned it, but because you've realized it's your natural state. You'll move not because you're afraid to be still, but because movement itself feels like an extension of peace. And others will feel it too. They won't know what's different about you. Only that when you enter, something in them softens. Because coherence is contagious. Your signal will whisper to their signal, "It's safe here." And that safety is the beginning of every transformation. You don't have to convince anyone. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to hold your signal clearly enough, gently enough, long enough, and the world will adjust. This is the real secret. You are not the echo of your circumstances. You are the tuning fork of your future. Every moment, every breath, every micro decision is an invitation to resonate with a timeline already unfolding, one that matches your clarity, not your confusion. And that clarity isn't loud. It's soft. Soft enough to miss when you're performing, but unmistakable when you're listening. You already know how to listen. You've just been told to drown it out. But the deeper self, the one who feels before, thought has never stopped sending signals. Through dreams, through sensations, through the ache of what hasn't been expressed yet. And when you pause long enough, you'll feel it, not as a command, but as a gentle tilt. A leaning, a yes that doesn't rush, a no that doesn't need defense, a knowing that hums without needing to be explained. That's your real compass. And it's more accurate than any advice you'll ever get. So here's the invitation. Trust it. Trust the goosebumps that arrive for no reason. Trust the sudden exhale when you realize you've been holding your breath for years. Trust the quiet relief that settles in when you let something go. Not because it was wrong, but because it no longer matched your signal. You are not behind. Are right on time for your own frequency. And that frequency is not static. It evolves. As you soften, it sharpens. As you let go, it clears. As you listen, it leads. This is not a performance. This is a remembering. You were always meant to live this way. Not perfectly, but presently. Not in control, but in collaboration. Not striving, but signaling. And the signal is you. Breath by breath. Step by step. Yes by yes. By stillness. You've already begun, and the field is already listening. There is a place inside you that never rushes. It does not fear missing out. It does not claw for timelines or beg the universe to move faster. This place, quiet, ancient, steady, knows something that your surface often forgets. When your signal is clear, life bends. It doesn't always bend immediately, but it always bends precisely. And the precision isn't controlled by your urgency. It's guided by your readiness. So much of what we call impatience is actually a signal, not yet aligned with what it's asking for. You say, why hasn't it come? But the deeper question is, have I become the version of me who can hold it? Because that's what the field is waiting for. Not your need, not your effort. Your signal. And sometimes it waits with exquisite silence, not as punishment, but as calibration. To teach you how to tune your inner state not to the outcome, but to the quality of being that outcome would require. This is the quantum paradox. You don't get what you want by chasing it. You get it by becoming its match. And becoming doesn't mean pretending. It means deep coherence with the feeling you're asking life to mirror. Let's slow that down. If you say, I want peace, but your daily rhythm is wired with hypervigilance and inner criticism, then peace isn't blocked. It's being postponed by your nervous system's pattern. The signal is saying, I expect chaos, even as the mind declares peace. And the field, listening to your energetic tone, responds accordingly, not to punish, to reflect. But when you begin to notice that dissonance, softly, without shame, the real shift begins. You don't force peace to arrive. You create the conditions for peace to feel safe arriving. You notice the places in your life where you've grown addicted to struggle because it felt familiar. You notice how hard it is to sit still when there's nothing to fix. You realize how rare it is to experience stillness without guilt. And in those tiny moments of awareness, the signal begins to change. This is what the field listens for. Not your resume of effort, not your moment of recognition, not your breath of honesty, your willingness to feel what's been beneath the surface all along. Because that willingness is the frequency of readiness. It says to the universe, I am no longer performing alignment, I am becoming it. And that difference, that one shift, is enough to change everything. You've likely seen it already. Those eerie moments when you finally let go and something you'd been chasing arrives on its own. The call, the opportunity, the relief. It doesn't always look like what you imagined, but it always carries a clarity that feels strangely familiar, like it's been circling your life, waiting for the version of you who could receive it. We call this synchronicity, but it's not magic. It's coherence. It's the field responding not to your wish, but to your embodiment. And the more you live from that state, not sometimes, but often, the more reality begins to trust you back. It stops testing. It starts flowing. Because it no longer needs to shake you to wake you. You're already awake, already listening, already tuned out, and in this tuning, something strange begins to happen. You lose interest in forcing clarity. You no longer need to know what's next, because you've shifted your attention from content to context, from the scene to the source. You begin to care less about what's happening, and more about who you are while it's happening. You start asking softer questions. Does this feel like truth? Does this match my peace? Does this reflect the me I've been remembering? And those questions, asked in silence, become the architects of a new timeline, one not built by willpower, but by willingness. You see, the future doesn't form from pressure. It forms from frequency. And the frequency of I trust what's unfolding carries a much higher precision than I must make this happen. Not because surrender is better than effort, but because surrender is the alignment before effort. When you act from that place, not delayed, not forced, just aligned, your smallest gesture becomes exponential. A single email sent from coherence can ripple wider than 10 from anxiety. A short conversation from clarity can realign months of confusion, because what carries power is not size, it's signal. And your signal, once clear, is the most potent force you will ever wield. That's why the journey is never about changing everything at once. It's about changing the signal before anything begins. Even now, as you listen to these words, your system is tuning. There's nothing to push. Just notice. What are you resonating with? Which sentence stirred you? Where did your breath shift? These are not random sensations. They're your inner field adjusting to new architecture. And that architecture is not built from bricks, but from awareness. Brick by breath, signal by signal, moment by moment, you're reshaping the space from high, which your life unfolds. And as you do, old patterns begin to dissolve, not because you declared war on them, but because you stopped feeding them your signal. The story of unworthiness grows quiet when you no longer speak from it. The ache of abandonment softens when your presence stops leaving yourself. The need to prove evaporates when your nervous system finally receives its own attention. This is not performance. This is return to the version of you that always knew, not in theory, but in sensation, how to walk the aligned path. It's not a linear journey. It's a spiral. You'll revisit the same doubts, but each time with more softness. Each time with more noticing. Each time with more choice. And the more you choose from coherence, the less reality needs to test your conviction. Because it will no longer be fragile. It will be your frequency. Not rehearsed. Not declared. Just lived. That's where the signal becomes permanent. Not loud, but undeniable. Not perfect, but true. Not forced, but magnetic. And in that magnetism, the world begins to bend again. Not to please you, but to reflect you. Not because you chased it, but because you slowed down enough to match it. And now it's here. Waiting. Softly. Precisely. Already forming. Exactly. On time. Exactly on signal. Exactly as you are. There is a version of you already living the life you keep reaching for. Not in imagination, but in frequency. This version doesn't exist somewhere far away. It's not dangling in the distance someday. It's orbiting quietly in the present, waiting for you to collapse into coherence with it. That's the paradox. Your future self is not ahead of you. It's inside you, vibrating slightly faster, slightly clearer, just beyond the speed of self-doubt. And the moment you pause long enough to feel that quiet pull toward it, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing the timeline and start merging with it. You don't need to stretch yourself to become this version. You only need to remove the static, the mental noise, the habits of hesitation, the unconscious contractions that say, not yet, not ready, not enough. When those dissolve, gently, not violently, what's left is a clear channel. And through that channel, the field begins to recalibrate. This is not magical thinking. This is resonance physics. Every timeline you could live already exists as a pattern of probability. But it only materializes when you begin matching the frequency of the version of you who belongs to it. You don't get the reality you beg for. You get the one you already speak fluently in your breath, your posture, your tone, your decisions when no one's watching. So instead of asking, how do I make that future come true? Ask, how does that version of me move, rest, breathe, and respond right now? And then become that. Not in performance, in presence, because presence is not stillness alone. It is precision. When you're present, you are transmitting the exact coordinates of your identity into the field, and the field responds with exquisite intelligence. It begins collapsing possibilities into events that fit your signal like a tailored glove. Opportunities, conversations, invitations, not forced, but harmonized. This is why timing matters so much more than effort. There are moments when the entire field softens for you, not because you pushed, but because you attuned. These are openings, quantum windows, moments when the veil between timelines thins and the next step arrives like gravity instead of struggle. But these moments can't be seen with your eyes alone. They must be felt with the body. That sudden peace in your chest when you stop trying to convince someone. That unexpected clarity in your gut when a plan unravels and relief floods in behind the panic. That eerie stillness in the middle of uncertainty, where something in you smiles, not because it knows what's next, but because it finally doesn't have to. That's the future remembering you. That's you resonating at the frequency of already. You see, already is the native language of the field. Already safe, already seen, already worthy, already moving toward coherence. Not because the circumstances say so, but because your inner geometry has aligned to say so. This is why so many manifestations fail. Not because the desire was unworthy, but because the identity behind the desire was fragmented. When you say, "I want it," from a place of lack, the field doesn't judge, but it does echo. And that echo returns as more wanting, more reaching, more nearly dash, but dash not dash quite dot. But when you say, "I am it," softly, calmly, without needing applause, the signal becomes pure. You stop asking reality to bring you proof. You become the proof. And in that state, the loop closes. You no longer need the outcome to feel the feeling. The feeling itself becomes the magnetic field. And reality bends dot. This is not something to master, dot. It is something to remember. Because deep down, your cells already know how to do this. Your breath already knows how to lead. Your attention already knows what to notice. You were trained out of it by a world that worships noise. But you can return to it anytime you choose silence. Silence doesn't mean absence. It means space. Spaciousness is the mother of clarity dot in space. You feel the timeline selecting itself before your mind interferes. You feel the nudge to pause instead of explain. You feel the soft no before the logical yes. You feel the invitation that needs no justification. This is not about trusting blindly. It's about trusting somatically, letting the field teach you how your own signal sounds when it's not distorted by survival, performance, or pretense dot. And the beautiful thing is, this signal evolves as you do. It sharpens, refines, reorganizes, not because you force it, but because you finally stop interrupting it. You become the observer and the observed. The field and the frequency dot the request and the answer. And in that sacred loop, reality becomes less about what you can get and more about what you can carry. Not in burden, in resonance dot. You begin to carry peace in rooms where others panic dot. You begin to carry softness in moments where control used to live dot. You begin to carry presence like a lantern, and the world adjusts to the light. This is the quiet becoming. You don't graduate into it. You slip into it like water finding its level. You no longer ask for signs because your very breath becomes one. Not dramatic, not divine, just deeply, quietly attuned. And people feel it. They won't know what changed, only that you've stopped trying. You've stopped reaching. You've stopped negotiating with the version of yourself that never believed dot. And in its place stands someone who knows. Not because they have answers, but because their signal is clear. And clarity in a noisy world is power. Not the kind that dominates, the kind that harmonizes, the kind that doesn't need defense because it carries presence. And presence isn't stillness as resistance, it's stillness as signal. You're not being quiet because you don't know what to say. You're quiet because your signal is saying it for you. That's the essence of this work dot. To stop scripting your power dot and to start inhabiting it dot. No need for perfect plans. Just presence that ripples dot. No need for declarations. Just resonance that lands. And if you ever wonder whether it's working, pause dot. Notice the way your body now disagrees with what it used to tolerate dot. Notice the way your nervous system craves peace over adrenaline dot. Notice the way you feel when you no longer abandon yourself to be chosen. These aren't outcomes. These are shifts in signal fidelity. And the field, sensing the change, begins responding differently. Not with fireworks, but with flow dot. Not with applause, but with ease. Not with perfection, but with alignment. And when that alignment becomes your default, the world stops feeling like a puzzle. It becomes a mirror, not of who you were, but of who you are now, deeply, precisely. Already, there comes a point, not marked by fireworks or dramatic breakthroughs, when something inside you simply stops reaching. Not out of defeat, but out of recognition. You look around at your life, not to evaluate or control it, but to see it, to witness the signal you've been sending made visible in the patterns around you. And for once, you don't judge. You don't rush to fix. You simply observe, and in that observation, the field shifts again. Because you're not observing as a separate consciousness anymore. You've become the signal itself. This is the quiet destination of all quantum alignment. Not to stand outside your life, trying to bend it with will, but to stand inside it as a living transmission of coherence. You don't ask the universe to respond. You are the universe, responding to itself. Breath by breath, choice by choice, moment by moment dot, and what was once a question, how do I create reality, fades, because now you feel the deeper truth. You are always creating it, even when you forget, even when you hesitate, even when the signal is fogged by emotion or old stories. You are still shaping timelines, not as punishment, but as participation. The field doesn't wait for perfection. It responds to presence. And presence, at this depth, no longer needs to be protected or proved. It simply exists, like sunlight through fog, like a heartbeat beneath noise, like still water beneath a rushing current. You walk through the world, and the world begins to rearrange around your consistency. People notice it, not in your words, but in your energy. You say less, and they hear more. You plan less, and things unfold faster. You try less, and yet somehow everything feels more supported, because the field is no longer confused. The signal is clean, and that clarity is enough. You've entered the domain of subtle authority, the kind that needs no validation, the kind that doesn't flinch when life bends unexpectedly, because it knows every curve is still part of the song. You move slower, but land faster. You speak softer, but resonate deeper. You let go easier, because you no longer abandon yourself to keep what no longer fits. This is coherence, not just inner peace, but energetic precision. Your frequency becomes a tuning fork, not just for you, but for others. Without effort, you begin to recalibrate rooms, soften conflict, dissolve confusion, not because you're trying to help, but because your signal is stable. And stable signals reorganize chaos. This is how the quantum field works. Not through volume, through consistency. It doesn't care if your energy is loud or visible. It responds to the deepest layer, the one that doesn't shift based on circumstance. So when you embody safety, even in discomfort, the field echoes that safety back. When you embody enoughness, even in uncertainty, the field reflects opportunity. When you embody truth, even without a perfect plan, the field opens paths that logic could never map. Not because you control reality, but because you've become harmonious with it. And harmony always finds expression. It doesn't stay silent. It becomes events, encounters, ideas, openings, all shaped in the quiet architecture of your signal. But here's the thing. At this level of alignment, you begin to care less about outcomes. Not because you're indifferent, but because the process becomes the gift. You begin to realize that every breath, when lived fully, is the arrival you thought you were chasing. You see a stranger smile at you on a day you needed it most, and you feel the field speaking back. You feel tears rise in your throat during a conversation, and instead of hiding, you let them move through, and the room softens in response. You get a no where you hoped for a yes, and something in you relaxes anyway, because you trust the clarity of your own signal more than the promise of an outcome. This is when life becomes a symphony, not a strategy. You no longer chase alignment. You become it. Not just in practice, in posture, in tone, in how you enter a room, in how you pause before answering, in how you listen without planning your next words. And most beautifully, you begin to experience time differently. Linear steps dissolve. You no longer feel behind, because you see how everything, even delays, detours, disappointments, was reshaping your frequency for something more exact. Nothing was wasted. Every heartbreak was a tuning. Every failure was a reorientation. Every loss was a clearing of static. So that when this version of you arrived, the one not chasing, but choosing. There would be room for it to breathe. Room for the real signal to anchor. Room for coherence to take root. And now it has. You don't need to protect it. Don't need to explain it. You only need to live it. And living it doesn't mean floating in bliss. It means feeling everything without fragmenting. Holding yourself in the joy and in the ache. Being honest when it's hard. Being quiet when it's right. Being present when it's enough. And when you forget, because you will, you won't. Spiral. You'll return. Sooner. Softer. With less story. Because the signal is now familiar. It's home. And returning to it no longer requires collapse. Just breath. Just noticing. Just a single moment of pause before reaction. Because that pause, that sacred gap, is the doorway. It's where new timelines bloom. Not because you forced them, but because you stayed long enough in the now to let them see you. You don't need to be louder. You need to be truer. You don't need more tools. Need deeper trust. And that trust is not in the world. It's in your signal. The one that moves when you listen. The one that sharpens when you rest. The one that hums quietly beneath everything, saying, I've been here all along, waiting for you to remember. Not how to create, but how to be. And now, as you sit in this final moment, notice how quiet it's become inside you. Not empty, but clear. That subtle hum you feel, that's not the world changing. That's you, finally tuned to the frequency you've been carrying all along. You no longer need to reach. The field has already received the message. It's moving now, not because you asked, but because you aligned. So let this breath be your anchor. Let this stillness be your signal. And trust that everything ahead will meet you not through force, but through resonance. You've remembered what most forget, that reality doesn't respond to your noise. It responds to your truth. So rest here in this knowing. You are already the signal. You are already the shift. Subscribe to our channel so we can meet again next time. Other stories are also waiting for you. Stories that live in the quiet, just before the moment where everything begins.